Let's start recording. Here we go. Area and perimeter of a parallelogram. First of all, we need to know what a parallelogram is. A parallelogram is a four-sided figure with opposite sides parallel to each other. Okay, so think of a figure that's four sides. And so rule number one, it's got to be four sides. Rule number two is that the opposite sides must be parallel to each other. And if you can't remember that term parallel, it's the next point. Lines in the same plane that never intersect. Okay? We have to be a little careful with our definition of parallel. We cannot say lines that never intersect. Okay? And the reason for that is if I grab a couple meter sticks. If I hold these meter sticks up and I go like this, okay, will these meter sticks ever intersect? No, they won't. But are they parallel? No. The reason is because they're in a different plane. The word plane is kind of like, it's referring to like a flat two-dimensional surface, okay? But if I go away from the idea of a flat two-dimensional surface, and I think about a three-dimensional space, you know, I could put these things all sorts of weird ways and they will never intersect, but they're not parallel. So when you think about a flat two-dimensional surface, just think about a wall or a piece of paper. And now I'm on the same plane, and if I do this, well, of course they're going to intersect. They're intersecting right there. So parallel says these two lines, if you drew them forever and ever in the same direction, you know, this going up and going down, they will never intersect. They will never cross, they will never touch, they're parallel, okay? That's the idea of parallel. We got to understand parallel. So, for example, if I draw this, okay, that's a four-sided figure, but it is not a parallelogram. Because if I were to extend these lines, the problem I run into is they will intersect, okay? So this is not a parallelogram. Opposite sides, if you extend them forever, they will never intersect. That's the idea of a parallelogram, okay? There are certain parallelograms that have very specific names. The first is a rectangle. And a rectangle is a parallelogram, so that means four sides, opposite sides never intersect. But it has four right angles. Okay? It has four right angles. A parallelogram with four right angles is a rectangle. So, I mean, obviously you could draw a picture of one. Okay, there's a right angle. And what's interesting is that if I draw a parallelogram, if I told you that shape is a parallelogram and I only mark one of the corners with a right angle symbol, because of the rules of geometry, if one of the angles of a parallelogram is a 90-degree angle, the other three have to be. They can't not be. And if they're not, then it's not a parallelogram, okay? So, you know, that's what we kind of think of when we see a rectangle. The next one is a rhombus. And a rhombus is a parallelogram with four equal side lengths. Oops, that's typo. Okay, four equal side lengths. So it does not have to have four right angles, but the side lengths all have to be the same. So kind of maybe even think of like a bit like a shape of a diamond, okay? Where if that is that, and that, and if this has a side length of x, if this is a rhombus, then they are all x. But the angle measures do not have to be 90 degrees, okay? They can be, you know, whatever. You can have one of them be 100 degrees and another one be 80 degrees or something like that, okay? But all the side lengths are equal, okay? The next type is a square. And a square is, it's kind of like if you put a rhombus and a rectangle together, you get a square. Because the rules that apply to a rectangle are true for a square, and the rules that apply to a rhombus are true for a square. So it's a parallelogram with 4 right angles. Okay, that's the rectangle part. And 4 equal side lengths. That's the rhombus part. So a square, obviously, if that's side length y, then they're all y, and all 4 angles are right angles. So you have the characteristic of a rhombus. All 4 side lengths are the same. And you have the characteristics of a rectangle. 4 right angles. Okay? Now you kind of think of this in a weird way. Is a square a rectangle? Think about that for a minute. I'll ask you this way. Is a rectangle a square? No. It's not. Okay? Because here, this picture I drew right here, that's a rectangle, but it's not a square. But is a square a rectangle? Yes. Because a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. It says nothing about the side lengths, so whether or not the side lengths are different or the same doesn't matter. A square is a rectangle. It's a very specific type of rectangle. It's a rectangle with 4 equal side lengths. Is a rhombus a square? No. Because a rhombus says the 4 side lengths have to be the same, but we don't care about the angle measures. But is a square a rhombus? Yes. A square is a specific type of rhombus. A square is a rhombus with right angles. Okay? So yeah, it's just hurting your brain a little bit, but these things all kind of have connections to each other. Okay? Next part, what is meant by area and perimeter? Definition first of area. Area is the amount of space inside the boundary of a flat 2-dimensional object. Okay, so area is what you color inside the lines with your coloring book when you were a little kid. Okay, and you took out all your colors and you colored in the lines. What you were doing is you were filling in the area. It's the amount of space inside the boundary of a 2-dimensional shape. That's area. I'm going to have you add something. I want you to write always measured, or labeled might be a better word, either way, in square units. Okay, now the units might change. It might be inches, it might be feet, it might be miles, it might be centimeters. That doesn't matter. But it's always square units. So if someone said, oh yeah, the area of that square is 31 inches, that would be incorrect. Okay, you would have to say it's 31 square inches or 31 inches squared. Okay, and it's square units. That's area. Perimeter is the distance around a 2-dimensional object. Okay, and that's just measured in the units of the distance. So if you have a square and one of the side lengths is 10 feet, then your perimeter is going to be feet. 10, 20, 30, 40. Okay? Area is square units. Perimeter is just the units of the distance that the object has been measured in. Okay? Finding area and perimeter. How do you determine this? So first we'll start with area. To find the area of a parallelogram, multiply the base, which is typically designated by the variable b, okay, a lowercase b, that represents base. You multiply the base to the height, which is identified with a lowercase h. And area is always measured in square units. And I already said that, and I forgot that I had that on there again. But whatever, to write it twice means you can learn it a little better. Okay? So it's always base times height. Now it gets a little tricky. If you're dealing with a rectangle or a square, finding the base and the height is always really easy. But if you're dealing with a different type of parallelogram, you have to be a little bit careful when determining what the height is. And the height is always a line that is the perpendicular distance from the base to the other base, to its opposite side. Okay, perpendicular means it forms a right angle. When we get to some examples, this is going to make a little more sense. So we'll get to that. But just remember, with just a regular parallelogram that's not a rectangle or a square, finding the area is a little bit tricky. It can be a little misleading. We'll get to that. Second is perimeter. To find the perimeter of a parallelogram, add the lengths of the sides. Side 1 plus side 2 plus side 3 plus side 4. Now, if you're really understanding what's going on, and you really remember that parallelograms, the opposite sides are always the same length, you can take one side, double it, and then add that to double the other side. So if it's a rectangle that measures 3 inches by 5 inches, you can go, okay, 5 and 5 is 10, 3 and 3 is 6, 6 and 10 is 16, rather than going 3 plus 5 plus 5 plus 3 or whatever. There are different ways to do it, but that's the idea. It's up a little. Oh, dearie. Okay, let's look at a couple examples. Here we have what appears to be a rectangle that measures 22 inches by 4 inches. Okay, if we wanted to be sure, we could, I'm going to have you add that. That little box right there indicates right angle. Okay, that little box right there indicates a right angle. That means those lines are perpendicular. This is a rectangle. Okay, are we okay over there? You guys are so dramatic. Unbelievable. The area of a perpendicular or of a rectangle is base times height. BH, base times height. B times H, base times height. Okay, the base is 22 inches times the height, which is 4 inches. Multiply 22 by 4 and you get 88 square inches. Okay, very simple to do. You just multiply the base times the height. 22 times 4 is 88. Don't forget to label it correctly, square inches. Okay, the perimeter, okay, that's the distance around. So it's 22 plus 4 plus 22 plus 4. Or, and I'm going to write this in a different color, you could go 22 times 2, because there are two sides that are 22 inches. And add that to 4 times 2, because there are two sides that are 4 inches. Either way you do it, you should get the same answer, which is 52 inches. 44 plus 8, 52 inches. Okay, now that's not labeled as square inches because it's perimeter, and perimeter is simply a distance. Okay, perimeter is simply a distance. Next example, this is just a regular old parallelogram. It's not a rectangle, it's not a square, it's just a regular old parallelogram. The opposite sides are parallel to each other. The ones I just did in red, they will never intersect. The ones I drew in green, they will never intersect. Okay? This is a parallelogram. But finding the perimeter and area of this parallelogram can be a little bit trickier because the height, there's a couple different numbers there. But the height of a parallelogram is always formed by a line or a line segment that is perpendicular to the base. So here's the base. Okay, I'm going to draw it in green. That's the base. The height is always perpendicular. It's a right angle off the base. So the height of this parallelogram is not 8 feet. It's 6.5 feet. And that's where the slip up can happen. Or you look at this parallelogram, you're like, oh, it's just 12 times 8. But that is not true. It's 12 times 6.5 because the height is always a line segment that's perpendicular to the base. Okay? So this area is 6.5 times 8. Not 8. 12. Okay, the height is 6.5, the base is 12. And 6.5 times 12 is 78. Our units of measurement are feet, and its area, so we square it. 78 feet squared. Base times height, 12 times 6.5. Now for the perimeter, that's the distance around. Now we do not need that 6.5 anymore. Because if I start here, we'll go yellow. If I start here, and I go this way, that's 12 feet. Then I keep walking around the fence, there's another 8, then 12, then 8. Okay? So your perimeter is 12 plus 8 plus 12 plus 8. Or 12 times 2 plus 8 times 2. Or 12 plus 8 times 2. So there's a variety of ways to think of it. We'll just keep it simple. 12 plus 8 plus 12 plus 8. 12 plus 8 is 20. 12 plus 8 is 20. 20 plus 20 is 40 feet. Okay? That perimeter is 40 feet. Okay? I'm going to pause the video. All right, this example, obviously a parallelogram. Here we have a base of 2 centimeters. And then we have the other side length, which is 19.6. But then we have this third measurement of 19 centimeters. And it's important to know that this dotted line is perpendicular with that dotted line. Okay? So we got to start with area. Remember, area is base times height. And those two lines are always perpendicular to each other. So, what two numbers do I need to multiply together to get the area? This is the tricky one. Abel, what do you think? Never mind. Okay. Ethan?
19.6 times 2.
Okay, now that is the temptation, to multiply 19.6 times 2. But is the side that's 19.6, this guy right here, is it perpendicular to this guy right here? Is that perpendicular? Are those a right angle? No. So we cannot use those two numbers. We cannot use those two numbers as area. So what two numbers do we need to multiply together to get the area? Taylor?
19 times 2?
Yes. That is correct. Okay? It's 19 times 2. Okay? The base of this parallelogram is 2 centimeters. That's the base. The height is determined by a line that is perpendicular from base to the opposite side. Okay? So I got to have a perpendicular line going from this guy to this guy. Now, the problem is if I just try to have a perpendicular line that connects the two, I can't do that because this base is not big enough. But if I extend the base with an imaginary line and then create a perpendicular line that goes to the opposite of the base, then I get my perpendicular line. And perpendicular is indicated right there. So the base is 2. The height is 19. Okay, and that's the trick with parallelograms. Whenever you are calculating area, it's always base times height. And the base and the height are always two lines that are perpendicular to each other. Perpendicular means right angle. So you got to look for that right angle. Okay? So 2 times 19 gives you an area of 38 centimeters squared. Remember, area is always square units, so we have to label it correctly. 38 centimeters squared. Okay? Now, how about the perimeter, the distance around? What numbers do I need for perimeter? Who wants to take a shot at this one? What numbers do I need for perimeter? Christina?
19.6 and 2.
Very good. 19.6 and 2. Let me clean. Why is this not working now? There we go. Okay. Remember, perimeter is the distance around. So, Adam. So if I imagine myself starting there and going around the parallelogram, I'm traveling on the sides of the parallelogram, the edges. So that one is 19.6. That's that distance. Then I got to go along the top, which is 2. How do I know it's 2? Because the opposite side is 2, and the opposite sides are always the same length. So now I've traveled 19.6, 21.6. Then I travel on this side, which I know is 19.6 because it's opposite that guy. And then I travel the final 2. So the perimeter is 19.6 plus 2 plus 19.6 plus 2. Or you could go 19.6 times 2 plus 2 times 2. Or you could go 19.6 plus 2 is 21.6. Double it. Multiply that number by 2. Either way you do it, it's all kind of different ways of doing the same thing. The perimeter is 43.2. And what would my label be? Centimeters. Not squared, not cubed, just centimeters. Because distance is always the unit of measurement. Just centimeters, just feet, just miles, just inches, just yards, whatever. Okay? All right? So that's the last example. The key, when you are calculating area, look for those perpendicular distances. When you are counting perimeter, it's the distance around the parallelogram. Okay? We okay? Sorta, kinda, sorta. Well, we'll find out when we work on the homework. The homework is as follows. It is page 225, numbers 4 through 15 all. Yep, 4 through 15 all. That's there for me. Yeah, or 11.
I said 9 questions.
11, there we go. All right, enough of the recording. 12 questions.